Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining today's call. I'm Stephanie Lawley with the House Committee on Education and Labor. We are recording this call, but members of the media are also welcome to record on their end. We want to make sure that we get to as many questions from the press as we can today. At the conclusion of the speaking program, we will take questions in the order in which they are received. If you are asking a question, please use the raise hand function in the bottom of your screen to enter the queue, or by pressing *9 if you dialed in by phone. And now I will turn it over to Representative Wild for her remarks.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's press call about the Build Back Better Act, and especially the Education and Labor Committee's portion of the bill. I'm honored to be joined today by my friends and colleagues on the Education and Labor Committee, Representatives Donald Norcross of New Jersey and Joe Courtney of Connecticut, who are both great colleagues in the fight to expand access to good paying jobs for American workers, lower costs for families, and to set a strong foundation for America's children and future. Ultimately, we have a once in a generation moment here to make critical investments that ensure that America has the tools to compete and win during the 21st century. That includes ensuring that families can afford childcare and education, strengthening public schools, and lowering the cost of higher education. I have long been a vocal proponent of workforce development programs that ensure that we are training workers for the jobs we need and providing employers the talent they need to succeed and grow. I have regular roundtables in my district on this issue. Just last week, spoke to a group of HR managers from major employers across my district about some of the challenges that they are facing in attracting workers. The Build Back Better Act invests nearly $80 billion in workforce development programs that allow workers to build new skills while earning a paycheck, including trained apprenticeships that put money into the pockets of workers as they learn. It also puts $111 billion behind lowering the cost of higher education, including 2 years of free community college. I am proud that my district hosts 2 of Pennsylvania's 14 community colleges, and I really believe that the community college aspect of this bill is a game changer. My district is home to those incredible community colleges, and I've just seen firsthand the impact of leveraging their footprint to serve communities, small businesses, and growing industries, and of course, students. Whether they choose to attend a community college or a 4-year university, and many of those community college students, by the way, go on to attend four-year colleges to complete a bachelor's degree. Every American should have the opportunity to get the quality and affordable education they need to find a rewarding career. We can also train workers for jobs that fight climate change, securing a safe, healthy future for generations to come. These investments are not just common sense, they are broadly popular. And most of all, we know that we have a rare opportunity in front of us to invest in jobs, expand job training programs, and build an economy that is stronger and more resilient than ever. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Representative Joe Courtney. Take it away, Joe.
Great. Well, thank you, Susan. And again, it's a pleasure to be with you and Don here. We finished up a 15-hour markup process last Friday, which includes this package. And again, all 3 of us, along with our colleagues, obviously were aware of the fact that we were in a very unique moment in terms of in a comprehensive, transformational way, ready to invest in what the country desperately needs right now as part of the COVID recovery, which is exactly why the president described this agenda as Build Back Better. What this package does is not just turn us back to the days pre-COVID. We are obviously fixing a lot of the problems that COVID exposed, and obviously taking our country to a better place with all of the components that were included in this bill. Again, it's part of the budget resolution, which cleared both the House and the Senate. The different parts of the budget resolution were allocated to different committees. The Education and Labor Committee by far got the largest allocation because that's really where the priorities exist the most strongly. So I would describe, the real focus of the bill, which is to address some of the gaps that the COVID pandemic, as well as the COVID recession, has exposed. Number one, a gap in child daycare and pre-K access for families. Talking to employers, the damage that the COVID recession did to the daycare infrastructure in this country was just monumental and something we've never seen before, and it's still not recovered. And what this bill does is put $450 billion over a 5 to 8 year period to raise the eligibility for working families and middle-class families to qualify for child care subsidies. So families in New Jersey, families in Pennsylvania, and certainly in Connecticut are going to see a huge boost in terms of the help for the out-of-pocket costs that will now be capped at 7% for all families. And again, when we talk about trying to fill these job openings, which definitely came up just in the latest jobs report, we know that women are the population that have not re-entered the workforce to the same degree as they were in the last recession. And both anecdotally and statistically, we have data which shows that the daycare gap that exists right now is critical to getting this country on its feet again. And this bill does it in a huge way. The second is the skills gap, which again, Susan alluded to that in terms of a lot of these job openings that are out there right now are not jobs that people can just sort of walk in off the street and start working. They need to get the opportunities from both pre-apprenticeship training, Workforce Investment Act funding, which again are numbers that we have never seen funded through our committee over the years. In Connecticut, we have a strong network of workforce investment boards that today are getting deluged with requests from employers for people that can fill positions. And the problem that they face is they just don't have enough funding for the slots to meet that demand that's out there with employers. And secondly, the apprenticeship funding, which is $5 billion over 5 years. The three of us have worked to try and reauthorize the apprenticeship program known as the Fitzgerald Act, named after William Fitzgerald, hailing from Norwich, Connecticut, to meet not just issues in manufacturing and construction trades, but also other sectors of the economy. And that is the most efficient, direct way to address that. And this bill provides that opportunity. I'll end by just saying, some of the Connecticut reporters know, large employer in my district, Electric Boat Shipyard, 18,000 strong workforce. They have about 400 job openings this morning. And that's a big number, for just historically and even with the growth that's happening down there. And there's just no question that skills gap is really something that has got people very worried and concerned. And this bill meets that problem in a way that is truly, it rises to the level of the moment in terms of fixing that problem. And with that, I will now yield to a great member of the Education and Labor Committee whose personal history and personal commitment over the years to workforce development as a professional licensed electrician and member of an electricians local, and it just contributes in so many ways to the committee. My good friend from New Jersey, Don Norcross.
Thank you, Joe, for those kind words, and Susan for your leadership. It is an incredible time. Coming off a pandemic, which, as my two previous colleagues mentioned, exposed things to our workforce system that is a big problem. And with big problems come opportunity and ways to fix those in a meaningful way. So I was a single dad. Joe mentioned I did an apprenticeship. I went to that other 4-year school, the Apprenticeship Program, which is the single most successful training program in the history of our country, proven time and time again. And you're seeing a major investment that Joe talked about a few moments ago. But as a young dad in an apprenticeship, trying to find a daycare center, a childcare center that opened up 6 in the morning so I could get to my job just was something that was a real challenge. We held a roundtable down at our community college where Dr. Elisa Zappetti, early childhood specialist, talks about role models of parents, the most important thing in any child's life, and how important it is for that child to see that its parents work. Well, that's what we're doing here by providing those childcare opportunities. In addition to that, we're doing something that has been talked about for literally decades. 2+2, preschool 2 years and 2 years on the top end of a community college. That community college is just so important in our country. It answers so many questions. What do I want to do? Can I go? Is it affordable? And we have that real opportunity. But what we also do is making investments in every town and community by rebuilding our schools that are literally crumbling. $80 billion going into that. That will, for so many years, be helpful. We just came off Labor Day, and I'll finish up with this. Samuel Gompers, one of the early labor leaders of our country, says, what does labor want? We want more schoolhouses and less jails. And that's what we're doing. We're investing in people so that they can take care of their families and provide for themselves. And at some point, have those golden years with the secure retirement. With that, I'll yield back. And again, thank my colleagues for working this monumental bill that's going to change lives.
So Joe and Don, I think we've addressed the fact that we've got a lot at stake in our economic recovery, and we have a chance in coming days to shape a piece of legislation that fundamentally can and will improve the lives of millions of Americans. I'm very optimistic that we in Congress can get this right. And that means including the common sense investments in workforce and education and childcare programs that we've talked about and that we know will strengthen our families and our small businesses and our large businesses, honestly. So thank you all for joining this call. I'm going to turn it back to the committee now for any questions from the press.
Yes, thank you. That concludes our speaking program. If you have a question, click the raise hand button in the center bottom of your screen, or by pressing *9 if you dialed in by phone. We will take as many questions as we can. If you're asking a question, please let us know which member your question is directed to and your outlet so we can get to as many questions as possible. We're going to begin with a few pre-submitted questions. The first one is for all members. There are a lot of major proposals in this package. Can each member describe their top one or two priorities? And we'll start with Representative Wild.
Okay, so that's a tough one. You know, it's like asking you which one's your favorite child. But I have to say, I mentioned in my comments that I've got two outstanding community colleges in my district. And for me, I mean, again, this is only if I have to pick one, but I think the idea of not only assisting many first-generation college students with the ability to attain a higher education, but also the incredible boost that it would be to our employers. To me, it's just a no-brainer that this is something that we absolutely need to get done.
Representative.
So, sure. I mean, the jobs report that just came out, earlier this month, again, I think showed that the economy is reopening in a pretty impressive way, given the hit that was that we took as a nation. But there's clearly this is going to be clunky because of what we talked about, all three of us talked about, which is that trying to connect people to good paying jobs when they still don't have the skills to succeed at those jobs, I think is critical. And again, I think all of us in our districts are hearing about this from employers across the board, as well as folks who represent workers, is that we have really got to step up the job training and workforce development, or the economy is going to run into supply chain problems and production problems across the board. And again, it's not just in sort of manufacturing construction sectors. It's also, we're starting to see shortages in healthcare workforce and other parts of the economy. So again, I agree with Susan. It's hard to pick because they're all, in some ways, are all interconnected because community colleges are part of that. workforce development strategy. But I'll now turn it over to my friend, Mr. Norcross.
I love all my kids, right? But I talked about being a single dad. Joe talks about the opportunity. You know, the narrative was out there, in order to make it in America, you had to go to a 4-year school. Well, listen, kids over the last 2 decades have learned that. And that's why we have a shortage of those who work with their hands or the skill sets that we've seen. So those registered apprenticeships with the workforce development, incredibly important, no matter what you want to do. If you want to go to college, that's great. We have 2 years of community college. But if you want to go into a skilled registered apprentice, now's the opportunity. We're putting that behind it. But the one thing I'll say is none of that occurs if you don't feel comfortable and have an opportunity for those kids to be taken care of. You cannot have a recovery unless those children have a place for them to go and start their lives. And that child care is just so important. So between those two, I think they're linked together.
Great. Our next pre-submitted question comes from NBC Connecticut. What can we do in Connecticut to make sure our infrastructure projects are, quote, shovel ready as the federal funding arrives, so we don't lose out to other states? I think all three of you could also answer this question as well.
So I think actually, if you look at the formula that the U.S. Department of Transportation uses in terms of infrastructure funding, it actually is formula based by and large. So it's not like we're competing against Pennsylvania or New Jersey in terms of our allocation. So that actually doesn't, kind of keep me, worried. It really is whether or not internally the state of Connecticut's Department of Transportation, which is going to be the agency that actually disperses the funds that come through infrastructure, are shovel ready, in fact. And that's been sort of the tragedy of the delay in terms of getting a real infrastructure bill over the last 10 or 15 years, is that, the system really is not maybe on standby as much as they would be if we had consistent, persistent funding for infrastructure. And that's obviously a hot topic in Hartford with the governor and the leadership. And I think, the awareness about the fact that, they've really got to be ready to move the minute we get an infrastructure bill passed.
Great, and I can move on to the second question from NBC Connecticut. It is a major problem in Connecticut right now is the state and cities and towns are at odds with who pays for HVAC upgrades in schools, which is sorely needed across the state. Can this federal money be earmarked for that?
So Don, why don't you talk about school construction, because you brought it up.
No, as part of the American Recovery Act,
Right.
money was already allocated for schools' HVAC system. But let's be clear. The idea was to have systems upgraded, but you're not going to be able to do those overnight. Imagine every school wanted to upgrade at once. You don't have the workforce in America to do it, but you can do it. So the money's already been set aside for that. In this school construction piece, which is $80 billion, it goes across the entire gamut of upgrading school. So if you have the money allocated through the American Recovery Act for your HVAC systems, and it is an existing building, you're set. But this one, as I call it, from cradle to grave, you're going to build an entire school if you need it, or you can renovate it. So you can go either route.
Great. Another question: with so many manufacturing jobs needed to be filled, can the manufacturing pipeline be expanded to places like Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven, when young people struggle to get education and opportunities they need to keep them away from the streets? Crime continues to surge in these cities, and solid opportunities for them to change that pattern. I think.
So again, you could ask the same question about Philadelphia and Newark and
Yes.
other large urban areas there. And I'll just say really quickly, I mentioned at the outset that we have a network of workforce boards. There's 5 of them across the state, as I'm sure New Jersey and Pennsylvania is the same way. We actually have, I think, really good systems in place, in even, urban areas that are not traditional sort of manufacturing, or where manufacturing has exited, for decades now. And they're ready to go. I mean, this bill addresses and meets the moment, because what they need is the funding so that they can have the slots in place for kids and older workers as well, to be able to enroll in these pre-apprenticeship programs. And once you get through that, you're ready to be hired. And then it's all good from that point on. Again, I'll let my two colleagues talk about what they're saying.
So I'd like to chime in. My district has the major city of my district actually is also the area of greatest depression in economic situation. And what we've identified that I truly believe to be the way that we are going to connect the younger people of that part of the district to the jobs that we know are available is twofold. First and foremost, for us, it's a transportation issue. We are lacking in public transportation options, which, is not something that is shared by, say, Philadelphia, where they do have pretty vigorous public transportation networks. So I think the infrastructure bill, to the extent that it addresses public transportation, is really, really important to so many districts like mine. So that's number one. And number two, we've said it over and over again, but it's the childcare issue. So many people just can't figure out why. It's almost like, why would they go to work if all they're going to do is get their childcare expense covered and not much else? And that's assuming that childcare is even available, which right now is a huge challenge because so many daycare centers closed during COVID. But I would identify those as the top things that we need to address in order to make sure that our more economically depressed areas are being included in all of these great job recovery plans.
Simple one. The best social program is a job that pays enough that you can take care of your family. And that's where this investment has gone, trying to create those opportunities. The idea of having community college, or if you want to go into a trade, you can do both. Not everybody goes from high school to 4 years to a job. Myself, I went to community college way after I got out of high school. Those ramps on and off is what you've seen in much of the funding that we have set aside, is that as a job develops and you need additional or new training, it's there for you. So you might start out as an electrician. Who knows? You end up as a congressman one day if the training comes right.
Great. And this is the last question that we have. Is there a solution to be found for the substitute teacher shortage through this funding? Low pay and no benefits for them has them opting out of the profession. With COVID and quarantine rules, we need to know more now than ever. This has been a serious issue before COVID, and what can be done to affect, what can we do to affect positive change for the long term?
So the American Rescue Plan, which included the biggest education funding of all the COVID bills going back to the CARES Act, was, in my opinion, aimed directly in terms of trying to deal with these, COVID-driven problems in our education system. There's no question. I think I certainly, it's true in Connecticut. I'm sure it's probably true in my colleagues' state. A lot of older teachers, the experience of the pandemic drove a much higher than expected number of retirements. And that has created a shortfall in terms of putting teachers in the classroom, either as substitute teachers or new teachers. And, I think if you look at the dollar amounts that went to every single community through a Title I formula, that again came through our committee, by the way, when we passed the rescue plan back in March, that piece of the law in terms of elementary and secondary funding came through the committee, and Don and Susan were part of that effort to get those funds out to our districts, so that school superintendents at least have the resources to deal with this. And it's going to be an ongoing problem in terms of workforce development. And that's, again, one of the issues that I think, this new bill, the Build Back Better bill, is focused on, is the sort of longer term in terms of making sure that that piece of our workforce is boosted.
Joe, you bring up a great point. You don't want to go to work thinking you're going to die. So making sure that the vaccine is available, not only for teachers, but for students. The HVAC systems to make sure that you're not circulating. We did that in the last recovery bill. And now in this one, rebuilding of the schools. But a great way to also keep the teachers is to pay them what they're worth. And that in some states has been a real challenge.
Excellent. We do not have any other press questions, so now I'll turn it over to Representative Weil for some closing thoughts.
So I just, as I said before, we've got a lot at stake and we're in a transformative moment. I hope that the legislators will be guided by the best interests of our communities and our citizens, and not by politics that may be thrown at us from the other side or from naysayers, because I truly do believe that this is a generational opportunity that doesn't come often, won't come again for a very long time. And it was pretty clearly brought about by the COVID pandemic. But having said that, it was time for us to do many of these things despite that, or even if the pandemic had never occurred. And so maybe that, to the extent that we can call it a silver lining, maybe the silver lining is that we are all more open and receptive to actually doing big, bold things like what is encompassed by the Build Back Better Act. And with that, I thank you all for joining us, and hope that we will be moving forward expeditiously.
Great.
Great.
Thanks, Susan.